August 28, 2025, 3:20 a.m. It was another hopeful dawn over the Temryuk Bay, along the Sea of Azov. On Russia's floating fortress, commanders gathered on deck with glasses raised high. Their laughter echoed over the steel deck as they raised glasses, convinced Moscow's hold on the sea was secure. For them, it felt like a night of pride, triumph, and confidence. However, beneath the surface of celebration, danger was closing in. Ukraine had been waiting, watching, preparing. Within hours, the cheers would turn to screams. The fortress that once symbolized the Russian superpower would be obliterated in flames. The occasion was carefully chosen. Russian state media had been preparing to showcase the fleet's resilience, perhaps as a public reminder that despite losses in Sevastopol and the humiliation of the Moskva, Moscow still commanded the sea. The floating fortress, outfitted with secure communications and radar suites, was selected as the stage for this display. On board, the guest list was heavy with rank. Admirals, senior staff officers, and political overseers gathered on the upper deck. Some had just returned from frontline commands. Others carried reputations built on past campaigns. Together, they represented the brain of Russia's naval operations in the region. The night unfolded with rigid ceremony. A brass band played naval hymns. One by one, commanders delivered speeches, praising endurance, condemning Ukraine's futile attempts to strike, and boasting of Russia's unbroken grip on contested waters. Television crews documented it all. Wide shots captured the fortress lit against the dawn. Close-ups showed metals gleaming, hands clinking crystal. The broadcast would look like proof of dominance for viewers back home. On the other hand, for those on board, it felt like vindication. However, between speeches and applause, the cracks began to show. Conversations gradually slipped from formality to mockery, and some laughed off Ukraine's drone program. Others scoffed that Kyiv would never dare to touch this ship. The mood turned casual and careless. It was the kind of arrogance that only comes when leaders convince themselves they are untouchable. Notably, the fortress was a Buyan-M class warship, one of Russia's modern corvettes, designed for firepower and command. Compact but heavily armed, these ships carry Kaliber cruise missiles that can strike hundreds of kilometers inland. They also serve as mobile control posts, linking naval operations with shore-based command. In Moscow's playbook, the Buyan-M was a symbol of adaptation. Unlike lumbering Soviet-era cruisers, these ships were built to survive in contested waters. That said, these are fast, versatile, and most importantly, pretty difficult to track. However, the myth of resilience had already been cracked. In April 2022, the Moskva, once the pride of the Black Sea Fleet, sank under Ukrainian fire. Months later, drone raids in Sevastopol gutted landing ships and damaged dry docks. Each loss stripped away another layer of invincibility. That history gave the Buyan-M's role added weight. Unlike the Moskva, this wasn't just a missile carrier. It was a node of coordination, a ship from which commanders believed they could direct the fight safely and confidently. Losing it would mean exposing the Navy's command structure as fragile and its defenses as penetrable. This operation began long before August 28th in the quiet work of watching. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence, HUR, says its teams tracked the Buyan-M corvette for weeks. They combined human reports, coastal reconnaissance, and unmanned surveillance to build a clear picture of the ship's routine and who boarded it. HUR's public account names the units involved the Primary Unit and the Active Operations Department of Ukrainian Military Intelligence. Those units, HUR said, coordinated the drone strikes that would follow. Open reporting and the footage HUR released show a two-phase attack. According to HUR and subsequent press reporting, the first strike targeted the ship's radar and sensor array. It was a deliberate move to blind the corvette and prevent rapid targeting or missile launch. The second drone strike struck the hull, inflicting structural damage that forced the corvette to break off patrol and head to port for repairs. What weapons did Ukraine use? Multiple outlets report that small, fast-strike UAVs, including FPV attack drones, were employed. Some reporting names indigenous HUR drone types, reported in open sources as Rubaka/UJ-26 Bober and other one-way loitering drones, while other accounts describe the strikes simply as high-precision UAV attacks. Journalists and analysts flagged the operation as notable because FPV drones struck a relatively large missile corvette, a first of its kind in modern naval strikes. But why did they wait so long? Well, the answer lies in timing and effect. HUR's footage and statements frame the strike as carefully timed to when command personnel were aboard and the corvette's radar was active. Put simply, that window increased the chance of hitting high-value systems and amplified the strategic and symbolic impact. In simpler words, random hits damage hardware. Likewise, a targeted hit at the right moment disrupts command and simultaneously sends a political message. Independent outlets note HUR's claims remain reported by Ukrainian sources, and that some of the details, exact unit names, exact drone types, casualty figures, lack independent verification in open Western reporting. Still, the pattern is consistent with Ukraine's recent tactics. Those include persistent surveillance, layered intelligence, and precision UAV strikes aimed at critical systems rather than mass destruction. So, yes, Kyiv watched and waited for the moment that would maximize military effect and political resonance. When the ship presented itself with commanders aboard and sensors active, Ukraine struck to disable command and control first. Then, they degraded the ship's combating abilities. Consequently, Russians got a blow to Russia's command confidence at sea. The first warning wasn't a sight, but a sound, the sharp crack of impact. The atmosphere on deck changed instantly. Officers who had been clutching crystal glasses now gripped railings as alarms blared across the ship. Emergency lights flickered on, and the crew scrambled towards sealed compartments. Damage control teams hauled hoses into position. The fortress that hours earlier had been dressed for ceremony was now fighting for survival. Smoke began to rise from the upper decks. Flames licked around antennae and scorched paint from bulkheads. Orders were shouted over radios, but replies came broken, half swallowed by static. Onboard systems faltered. For the first time that night, commanders realized their ship was blind. A second blast rocked the corvette. This one shook the hull, jolting men off their feet. Storage crates crashed across the deck. The brass band instruments, abandoned only minutes earlier, clattered against steel. What had been a stage for Moscow's power turned into a tangle of fire hoses, stretchers, and debris. Rescue boats launched, cutting arcs around the ship to recover those forced overboard. Support vessels closed from the perimeter, their crews watching flames reflecting on the water. Radio intercepts later captured frantic calls for aid, where clipped, breathless voices kept on repeating, "We've lost systems," returning to port. By the next few hours, the Buyan-M was retreating under escort. Black scars marked its superstructure. Smoke still rose from open hatches. In response to the attack, Moscow chose to stay silent at first. Hours passed before the Ministry of Defense released a statement. It admitted damage, but called it minor, insisting the warship had returned to port safely. There was absolutely zero mention of casualties. However, Ukraine, quite obviously, couldn't appreciate that silence and took a different approach. Their defense intelligence released strike footage almost immediately, where drone camera feeds showed explosions on the corvette. The clips spread fast, carried by telegram channels and then international outlets. On Russian state television, anchors repeated the minor damage line, showing stock footage of ships at sea rather than images of the Buyan-M. Online, however, the gap between official statements and reality was harder to contain. Independent monitors geolocated footage of the burning vessel, matching it to the corvette seen earlier in propaganda broadcasts. Casualty reports began circulating within hours. Ukrainian sources claimed senior officers were injured. Russian channels acknowledged injuries among crew, but avoided details. As with many strikes in this war, exact numbers remain disputed, but satellite imagery later confirmed the ship was docked for repairs. On social media, there was a visible contrast. In Ukraine, celebratory memes and clips flooded timelines. On the hand, in Russia, moderators moved quickly to delete videos showing flames and evacuations, but fragments kept slipping through. The propaganda battle was as fierce as the strike itself. One side worked to downplay, the other worked to amplify. For anyone watching both, the truth lay somewhere in between. The Buyan-M was damaged badly enough to be pulled from combat, and the image of naval strength Moscow had tried to project had been punctured overnight. The immediate consequence was operational. The Buyan-M's removal for repairs left gaps in patrol schedules and forced Russia to reassign escort duties across the Sea of Azov. Coordination that once ran through the corvette now had to be rerouted to shore. In addition, the strike accelerated a change in posture. Russian commanders began dispersing assets more sincerely to keep high-value ships closer to defended ports. Western analysts pointed to the attack as evidence that Ukraine's drone warfare had matured into a tool capable of degrading modern warships, not just harassing them. For countries observing from the outside, it confirmed that Russia's naval dominance was not absolute, even in waters it considered secure. The loss of one ship did not change the balance of firepower, but it did change calculations inside Russia's command structure and in capitals far beyond the Sea of Azov. Now the question is, if a ship designed to command and survive can be forced out of the fight, what does that say about Russia's broader naval posture? What do you think? Was this Ukraine's boldest strike yet, or one step in a longer campaign? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And while you weigh in, remember, this won't be the last chapter. Every week brings new targets and new risks. If you want to stay ahead of the story, to know what unfolds before the headlines catch up, subscribe now.